All right, Gator fans, I am here with two-time Florida Gator national championship coach and college football legend, Urban Meyer. Coach, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. It's been a long time, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, it's been a few years, and I got to see your family and see my former punter. It's a great trip down memory lane when I see you guys. Good to see you.
It is definitely a great trip down memory lane for us, too. You've been out of the game for a couple years, and recruiting kind of looks different than it did when you left. How do you think NIL would have changed your approach to recruiting?
Oh, it's well, my understanding is it's completely different. I'm still very close with many college coaches and colleagues, and I visit with them, and I hear differing stories. Ali, I hear that it's simply if Alabama gives you 15,000 a month, you have to beat it.
Mhm.
Then I hear from other people, no, that's not true. That's a lot of inflated numbers, and it's more about relationship. And so I don't know the exact truth of all of it. There's probably somewhere in the middle there. But it was, completely different. I remember we took a whole different approach when I got to Florida, and it was based on academics. We're going to graduate. We're going to win games. We're going to send you to the National Football League. And I remember I had those three everywhere in the facility, and we did it. We had an extremely high graduation rate. We won. Guys got a lot of rings, and then after a while, man, it was a football factory for the NFL. So
Yeah.
recruiting, we had a really hard recruiting staff. We worked at it. It was 24/7, and it worked out really well. We had great players.
One of the things that we hear from college coaches a lot now is that they feel like they always have to like re-recruit their players continuously while they're at their school. Do you think that that's a new aspect of college football, or were you always continually recruiting the guys to stay on your teams?
No, no. That I'd struggle with that. That's you know, if you're sitting there worried about, and which they are, which I get it. I'm that's one of the reasons I have no desire to go back is, if you're constantly worried about your guys leaving, as a bad practice, you demote them. You know, you're at a smaller school. I started my career at Bowling Green, and I talked to those coaches, and if a player has a great year, he's gone because he's going to go to a Power Five school. So it's very different. I'm not saying it's all bad, but it is much different than back in the day.
So you know what a pressure cooker the Florida job can be. And I think Coach Napier is feeling that fan heat right now. When you were at UF, how did you block out the noise?
I really didn't. There's things we did well, and me handling the stress and the pressure and the fear of letting people down. When we won the national championship in '06, I remember my father and my mentor Earl Bruce. It was in the stadium in Arizona. You were there, and I remember after all the dancing and celebrating and you know everybody throwing Gatorade all over the place. I went and sat down and I said, what's really cool? This is it. For the rest of my career, I'm going to have fun doing this because the pressure's off. That's untrue.
Right.
Every waking moment from that day was spent to get another national championship because I felt like we were letting people down from Gator Nation to our former players to our team. It actually ate me up, Allie. It was something that I couldn't sleep, I couldn't eat. It was just 24/7. How do we find a way to get another championship?
Obviously, you knew the pressure was going to be more coming from Utah to Florida, but did you realize quite how intense this job was and this fan base is before coming on?
And I went, people ask that about Florida, and I worked at Ohio State. There's probably five jobs that are like that they're just, that anything other than competing for a national title, it's miserable. And I worked at two of them. Ohio State's the same way.
Mhm.
It was so. I don't want everybody to say, well, it's Florida, Florida, Florida. No, go ask Alabama how it is. You know, I I would put Ohio State, Alabama. Florida's been down for a minute though. They haven't won a championship in a while, so I don't know if it's still the same intensity. But I remember when we got booed, and we're 13-1, and you're getting booed, and we couldn't sell tickets to Sugar Bowl, and I just felt, my gosh, And I remember Coach Spurger telling me the same thing. It reached a point where you're winning 12 games, and everybody's, what's the problem? What happened? And that wears you out.
We'll get right back to Coach Meyer, but we are less than 2 weeks away from UF versus FSU in the Swamp, Saturday night, 7 o'clock kick. We are going to be tailgating and we want you to come join us. Tickets and details are in the description of this video, but we're going to have food, drinks, shade, TV, and a whole lot more. If you're going to be in town, come hang out with us. It's going to be a blast. When you first came to UF, you had a system that you wanted to run. And you obviously had some talented players on that roster that you inherited, but they weren't necessarily the ideal players for the system you wanted to run. How soon did you realize that? And how hard was it to adapt to what you did have to make it work?
How good are you?
I mean, it's like I was there during this time or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So we brought the spread offense, and a lot of it was based on timing and how long. We did a lot of empty passing, which means we would at time turn guys loose and expect the ball to get out. In the SEC, the defense linemen are a little bigger, faster than the Mountain West Conference. I had Dan Mullen, Steve Adazio, and many great coaches on my staff, John Hevesy. And our first year, we were awful. I mean, our offense was terrible. And I remember I want to say, we got just smacked at LSU. We beat Tennessee. Alabama killed us. And then we lost LSU, and that's when I knew we had to make a change. We had a bye week until we played Georgia. I moved Billy Labs because we didn't play with a fullback or really tight ends back then. It was all spread. And that night, I had a staff meeting starting at about 1:30, 2 o'clock. Dan Mullen, Steve Adazio, and I went to my house, and Shelly made pots of coffee, and we stayed up all night. And we changed. We added gap schemes. We added power. We added a fullback. We added the tight end. Tate Casey became more valuable for us, and we changed the offense. And we went to Georgia in 2 weeks, and I mean, you can't do this now, but we went full padded practice for 2 weeks. And because we had to change, we changed more to a power spread than a spread. And, we went to Georgia. It wasn't exactly like we lit it up. We scored the first 2 times we touched the ball, and then we hang on for a 14-10 win. I believe it was 14-10. But then it got better and better and better, and Chris Lee got more comfortable with it. We adapted to his talents. And then, obviously, in 2006, we played the 2 quarterbacks with Tim and him. And that was risky. But both the quarterbacks left their egos at the door, and it was really hard to defend both style of quarterback.
I think when you came to Florida, so much was made about you having a psychology degree and that being something that you used a lot in your coaching strategies. And how much psychology goes into getting the most out of each player? You talk about, the different strengths and such that you have of the players you've had. How do you identify what motivates each guy? Because it's a little bit different for everybody.
You're exactly right, and it's something that I leaned on quite. I was one of those guys that I came from a really high-end academic family. I didn't necessarily love school, and it got to the point where I was in college. I changed majors several times, and then I run into my advisor said, psychology, you can get out of here in 2 years, a year or something. I said, boom, take it. I fell in love with it. And I almost went that way. My senior year in college, I almost said, I'm not going to coach. I'm going to become a psychologist. That's how much I loved it. And it was every day. It was something that I think I was probably a little different than a lot of people, but motivation and inspiring a team and the cause and effect of human interaction and human behavior and performance. Those are all things that I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out. I tried to get relationship with all the players because, like you said, everyone's different. And I always tell people, love, fear, and hate are the strongest motivators. Use them all. And we did. Obviously, love's the only one that's sustainable. But, I like to think that especially those great teams, those are highly, highly inspired teams.
Oh, they absolutely, absolutely were. Let's talk a little bit about special teams. Obviously, I have a affinity for special teams because of Eric being punter at Florida, you put a huge emphasis on them. Talk a little bit about their importance and how you think they have contributed to your football success. You were on the forefront of some major special teams innovations, truly.
Yeah, it was something that I really didn't appreciate for the early part of my career, and then I was at Notre Dame, and Bob Davie made me special teams coordinator. I didn't actually want to do it, but I had no choice at Notre Dame when he said, "You're it." And so I studied it, studied it. From that point forward, I was a special teams coordinator the rest of my career, and I became our edge. And Eric will tell you, running that fake punt at Arkansas, in the SEC championship game, how many block kicks we had, and it was my way of the cathartic moment of coaching, because as a head coach you don't get to coach that much. You're dealing with everything, but it was my chance to touch every player on the team, to touch defensive players, to hug them up and hug up the offensive players, and plus we had a rule that you couldn't start unless you played on special teams, and that was a rule, and I think our players at Florida, I don't think I knew they embraced that. And I'm telling you, Ali, there was times it was fun to be around those guys. I mean, I think one year we blocked 6, 8 kicks or something like that, and you have Joe Hayden, Jeff Demps, Janoris Jenkins, Chris Rainey. I have these just monsters playing special teams, and everyone's fighting to get on them. And I knew when that happened, we had a chance to be great.
I can tell you what, I still have block a punt, win the game embedded in my head, because that was something that
Do you
Eric
remember
would
the
always
percentage?
say.
Do you remember the
Say that
percentage?
again?
Do you remember the percentage?
No, what is it? Tell me.
It's a
I know there is.
25-year study was done years ago that if you block a punt, you win the game 9 out of 10 times.
It's crazy. That is. Do you think that teams put less emphasis on special teams than they did during the time that you're at Florida? Or do you think, I mean, I know Florida at the moment doesn't have great special teams, but just in general across college football?
It was something I had my little rituals like we all do. On Sundays, I'd come in after a game, and obviously I'd get my work done, and I'd grade special teams first. And I'd do offense and defense, and then I'd throw on the opponent. And I knew pretty early on if we're going to win that game. I wouldn't say much to anybody, but then I would let some of my closest, whether it be Charlie Strong or whether it be players that I really trusted, I said, we're getting ready to kick this ass here in a minute because they don't care about special teams. You could tell. It's a mess. There's no creativity. They don't try hard. They're good players on a special team. I don't know if we ever lost a game against a team like that. But when you faced a real team, and I mean, I would get that feeling in my chest and my stomach, like, oh my God, because you're watching. They have their best players on special teams. They're very well coached. The head coach is involved in it. When we face those teams, those are those fights. And I'd like to think that when they watched the Florida Gators play, they knew they were in for a street fight because the best players are on kicking game.
I mean, Florida special teams were definitely the top in the country back then. I appreciate Coach for joining me. I chatted with him about Swamp Kings, and we'll be releasing that video soon. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel because you don't want to miss it. If you missed me asking him about possibly returning to coaching, click right here so you can check it out.